This and all the free content of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Become a patron today and help support the show while getting exclusive content made just for you. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And we thank you in advance.
It was because of the schedule that we were under to get the manuscript to the press.
Okay.
And it was just around the clock, day and night, night and day. And when I handed it in, I just kind of thought, this will never float.
Really?
I was just exhausted. I just exhausted.
Yeah.
And I said, this just won't float. And I kept thinking of all the ways in which it would be picked apart, and never dreaming that it's been just so well received. It's just the way life is. You know,
that's true. That's true.
You think the worst all the time.
Yes, you do.
And, it doesn't always mean that it comes out good when you think that, but in this case, it certainly did.
It did, yeah. No, we're always our own worst critics, aren't we? Though
we are. We're our own worst critics. I'm one of the greatest.
We're too far into it to really see it for its true nature, whatever it is that we do. Because I had the same thing when I started this dopey little podcast. I thought everybody's going to hate it, and I hear from people all the time just really nice, glowing things. There's certainly people who hate it out there.
Of course.
But I don't pay any attention to them.
No, who cares about them?
Yeah.
When I handed it in, I thought it would be everybody. You know?
Yeah, well, that's what
You know, but it's the risk any author takes.
Yes.
And but it's worth the risk.
Well, when you do these things, you have to kind of like open your abdomen and spill out your guts. And
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and you any little bit hurts because it's still kind of an open wound after you do it. You know, as time goes on, you can live with it, but right away it's tough.
Yeah, it is. But I tell you what, almost the moment it was released, it started getting all these reviews, and it's been 5 stars on Amazon from June 7 to this moment.
Good.
And we've now got like 130 reviews on it, and it's still 5 stars. And
great.
You know, those people, they could say anything; it wouldn't matter.
Right.
They could just come out and just say, "I hate this thing. This is a piece of trash," and give them a 0.
Yep.
But no, it's been amazing, just amazing.
And it makes me feel good to hear that someone as accomplished as you also feels the same way after finishing something. You know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because now I don't feel so unique and alone.
Well, I'm glad to have company too.
I'm sure.
It's a solitary job.
It is because for a long time you're just kind of locked away, and you're declining invitations to go to a dinner party or whatever. And
you bring that up. I actually was invited to dinner parties that I forgot.
Right.
Because I just wasn't in the moment. I was with George Meade somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I get it though. I get it because you get into that zone, and it's so hard. You can't just turn that on. No. So if you're in that groove, you've got to stay there as long as is natural, because sooner or later something's going to happen. You're just going to it's going to go away. And you got to wait until the inspiration comes back, or it may never come back. Yeah. So it's scary. And people that don't do that stuff don't get that.
No.
And
when you're writing now, you've got a pattern going that you're following, and you want to make sure that what you have at the conclusion of this works.
Right.
And you can't interfere with that. No. You just can't. You just got to keep going until that is done.
Yep.
And it may be a series of paragraphs, it may be a chapter, maybe whatever, but you got to go until that is done.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be 3 a.m.
Well, exactly. That's right. There's no 9 to 5.
No, there's no 9 to 5.
No, people don't get it. People don't get it. Are you ready over there, Eric? Okay. All right, so we're going to start then, and we'll get right into it. So here we go. You ready, Kent?
I am. Fire away.
All right, here we go.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And oh, have I got a treat for you tonight. You all know this book because I've heard from a lot of you. You've read it. I've heard from others who say they can't wait to read it. It's Meade at Gettysburg, A Study in Command by Kent Masterson Brown. And enough with the superfluous flummery. We're going to get right to our guest today, Kent Masterson Brown. Welcome, Kent.
Well, my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for accepting our invitation.
Pleasure.
So today we're talking about chapter 19. And the name of that chapter is I Found He Had Retired in the Night. And this is the last chapter of the book. It's after the Battle of Gettysburg. And I thought it was good that you chose this one for us to talk about because so much criticism has been levied against Meade for not pursuing and destroying Lee.
I chose it. That's why I chose it.
Exactly. And I'm glad you did because we are fans of Meade over here, and we think he has gotten a bum rap over the years. So why don't we start off with just the July 8th. What is the condition that Meade himself is in? He writes to his wife and he tells her
he's in tough shape. I mean, he's like everybody else in the Army. He hasn't had a change of clothes since he became commander of the Army on June 28. He hasn't had a decent meal. He hasn't had a sleep. He's been awake, save for periodic cat naps whenever he can get them. But he's had no sound sleep since he was named commander of the Army. And one can only imagine what that man was feeling on July 8, given his tenacious tactical command of the Army on July 2nd, and then his command of the Army on July 3rd, where they finally secured a victory, but with a terrible cost. And not only in terms of human life being lost in those 2 days, but in terms of Meade's army not being supplied at all. And, we forget that at the beginning of the campaign, when Meade was named commander, up until July 1, he made 3 different requisitions to Montgomery Meigs, the quartermaster general of the Army. All those were for shoes. He wound up ordering 51,000 pair of shoes.
Jeez.
And they never arrived. We forget that he may order this, but did it arrive? No.
Right.
Why? Because one, he left the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, which was supplying him at Frederick. He left it because he moved north. Once he moved north, he established a supply base at Westminster on July 1. But the problem with it is, even though they were backing up 5 trains, one behind the other, in convoys coming out of Baltimore to supply this army with 2,000 tons of supplies every time the group of 5 trains would arrive at Westminster, they'd unload 2,000 tons of supplies. But the problem with it is, because Meade was forced away from the Pipe Creek line and forced to concentrate at Gettysburg because of the disaster that occurred with respect to the 1st and 11th Corps, that now that supply base was 22 miles in his rear. And that was the only avenue to get from Baltimore to Westminster was the Baltimore Pike, which you're on right now, by the way.
That's right.
And it was under Confederate attack almost the entire time Meade was at Gettysburg. So nothing was getting through. Those 51,000 pair of shoes, God knows where they were. Probably at Westminster somewhere. And I often look at horses and mules. I come from a horse country. We pride ourselves in horses down here. But, the Army regulations required a horse to be fed 14 pounds of oats and 14 pounds of hay a day.
A day, yes.
A day. Now, Meade has 60,000 of those animals. Imagine the chore of seeing to it that 60,000 horses each get 14 pounds of oats and 14 pounds of hay a day. Well, they can't.
I'm so glad you brought this up. Are you familiar with Chuck Teague's book, Gettysburg by the Numbers?
No, I'm not.
It's a small little book. You can carry it in your pocket when you're out on the battlefield. And he has a page about horses and mules. And it's my favorite page. It's page 21. Yeah. And it's my favorite page because it talks about that. And I always use that to illustrate to people just the undertaking it was to move this army.
Oh, yeah.
And so now these horses, we'll get into the horses too, because, that's what moves the army. That's what moves the artillery. It moves the wagons. It moves the cavalry.
Right.
When they leave Gettysburg, are the horses just doing fine? Is it just the men who are tired, or the horses too?
No. The book, I quote diarists.
Yeah.
For instance, on July 14, the day they find that Lee has escaped across the Potomac River, one diarist writes that all the men is a Pennsylvania soldier. Mm-hmm. All the hungry, they haven't been fed, they're in desperate need of clothes. The horses are, how did he put it, blue. Hundreds are dying every day. And in my work on this book, I came across the report of the Assistant Quartermaster General of the Army. This was a report made to Montgomery Meigs. And the Assistant Quartermaster General counted that between the time the campaign began, it's a short campaign, from June 28 until July 14th, the Army of the Potomac lost 14,000 horses.
Jeez.
Now, he counted only 1,900 having been battle casualties at Gettysburg.
Right.
All the rest were what happened subsequent to the battle.
So that's hard use.
And by the way, those are hard facts.
Right.
Because I was a lawyer for 47 years. Those are hard facts.
Right. Hard to argue with.
Tough to get around. Yes, tough to find a rebuttal to.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was Washington Roebling you quote in the book. He sent a message to Warren, and he said, "The roads are frightful. The 6th Corps batteries have been trying all day to get over. It will take until tomorrow noon before they are entirely across, and then the horses will be unfit for use."
Correct. There you are.
Yeah.
And the problem with not being, they haven't been fed, and they haven't been shoed.
Mm-hmm.
Iron up there. You got to get coal. You got to make the shoes. None of them have had any of those. So they don't have shoes. They come up lame. They don't have food, and they come up lame. And then they'll basically just collapse eventually. And what he's saying is these poor animals are in such bad shape that he knows once they get them where they want them, those horses will not be useful anymore. Even George Meade talks about how the horses are unable to pull his batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Even up to the line where he's confronting Lee at Falling Waters, or above Falling Waters, between Hagerstown and Falling Waters, Downsville line. And I remember in Edwin Coddington's book, and I'm a great admirer of Edwin Coddington, although I take issue with him on one issue in this book. But in large measure, I'm a great admirer of him. He's a great a master of diaries and letters and so forth, and creating a whole out of them. But Edwin Coddington made the comment that Meade came to the conclusion during the pursuit of Lee that he really was dealing with an instrument, meaning the Army, that was simply not capable of carrying out what he wanted it to do.
Mm-hmm.
It just was not capable.
Yeah.
And it comes from not being fed, men not being fed, horses and mules not being fed, people barefoot. How many of these poor guys are without shoes? It's unbelievable. But see, those shoes never arrived for them.
What was it, Howard, I think? He sent a message to Meade. He said, "My men are suffering for want of shoes."
Yeah.
And then he also wrote to General Ingalls, "One half of the effective strength of the Corps cannot march for want of shoes and stockings. Draw 3,000 pairs of shoes and 5,000 pairs of stockings and forward them to this place. The remainder of the Corps will march as soon as provisions arrive." There's another good quote that you have in here from Charles Wygant. That was my band teacher's last name, Wygant. Anyway, he says, "We were, to the people of Frederick, the most unsoldierly, sorry-looking, victorious veteran army it has been the lot of any human being of this century to look upon. For 2 days we had been spattering each other with mud and slush and soaked with rain, which was falling in torrents. Our guns and swords were covered with rust. Our pockets were filled with dirt. Muddy water oozed from the toes of the footmen's government shoes at every step, ran out of the tops of the horsemen's boots, and dropped from the ends of the fingers, noses, and chins of all." And yeah, why can't they just go and demolish Lee? I don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand.
I mean, come on, people.
Matt.
Yeah.
People who respond will say, "Oh, but Lee's men suffered the same thing."
Well, so let's get into that. So Lee's men, what condition are they in? They're in the same condition, basically, right?
Fundamentally suffering the same as they did. However, there's one big difference. And that is, as we know, when Meade brought the Army of the Potomac to Gettysburg, it was hurried. It was a forced marches, like the Sixth Corps, 32 miles,
right.
20 hours it took them to get there. All this trying to get to Gettysburg. Once they got there, their hospital systems were all, they had just selected houses anywhere to put people.
Right.
Most of them within range of enemy gunfire. And they all ultimately had to be moved. And so they never were able to establish any, even assuming they had provisions, any system whereby they could even care for wounded or even feed the men. Lee, on the other hand, he came on the battlefield deliberately. July 1, he was the victor that day. And so each of his corps came on the battlefield deliberately. Each one of them, as they deployed, they developed hospitals 3 miles generally behind the lines where they believed they would actually confront the enemy. And around those hospitals, all the quartermaster and subsistence stores of each division that established those hospitals were arranged. And so all their subsistence stores, all their quartermaster stores were right at the hospital site 3 miles behind the lines.
Okay.
And we know those hospital sites. Any Gettysburg guide knows every one of those hospital sites.
Right.
And so what you have is an army that, has a lot of beef on the hoof, lambs, sheep, hogs, whatever they have confiscated or have purchased with Confederate money or promissory notes or whatever. They all have that. So that even though the men in Lee's army may have been fed meagerly, they were fed. The horses and mules were fed. Unlike Meade's army, which was destitute of everything.
So,
because of the situation.
So even though they suffered a defeat, Lee's men are in slightly better shape, at least, than Meade's.
They're in better shape.
Yeah.
And of course, during the retreat, Lee is moving on the hypotenuse of a triangle.
Right.
To Frederick.
Yeah, good point.
To Hagerstown. Where Meade is moving on the other two sides. Down to Frederick and then across to try to reach Hagerstown. So you've got one going 40 miles, the other going 64 miles.
Right.
And yeah, they've both been in driving rain, deep mud, all that stuff. But One army is basically fed, and its horses and mules are basically fed and are moving on a shorter route to get to the Potomac River than Meade's. And Meade has, his men have not been fed, his horses have not been fed or shod, his men haven't been shod. They're all barefoot. All these diaries, all these memoirs talk about their bare feet.
Yeah.
And yet in Lee's army, it's incredible. I put this out in the book. I said, this is a study in contrast here, where, and it's stunning in the sense that here he is defending Pennsylvania, his home state, and, you know, Philadelphia is not that far away, and you'd think these guys would just be fed out the, you know, the wazoo, but
Right.
they're destitute.
And how long is Lee's army able to be in their defensive line before Meade even gets to them? I mean, do they get some more rest eventually?
They do, and you know they begin establishing that Downsville line.
Yeah.
I mean, just as soon as Lee arrives in Hagerstown, the first thing he does is he and his engineers find that ridge, Salisbury Ridge, and begin fortifying it. And it takes them, you know, Meade begins to confront them around the 12th of July. They have been working on it since at least the 10th, maybe the 9th of July. And so they're prepared for him.
And so Meade, not only does he have the misery on the ground to deal with, but he's also got Halleck to deal with.
I pity me dealing with Halleck, really.
I don't feel, you know, I felt bad for him. I would not want this job at all.
No.
For reading this and it was just like, geez, man, like this guy just can't catch a break.
No, he can't. He can't.
You
know, Halleck in one dispatch will tell him that you've got to reach Lee by forced marches. And then within hours, he writes them another dispatch saying, we don't want you to attack now. We want you to have every man available. Right. So wait for all the reinforcements. And of course, Meade thinks these reinforcements coming out of Washington are just zero.
Right.
And you know, why wait for them? You know, but yeah, poor Halleck.
Poor Halleck or poor Meade?
Well, I mean, I'm talking here, poor Halleck in a sense.
Oh.
In that here he is between, you know, his commander and Lincoln's civilian assistants, Charles Dana and the Secretary of War and all these people who don't know anything about what Meade is doing. They even admit, we don't even know where you are or where Lee is.
Right.
We think you should destroy him.
Right, but attack him.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, right, and aren't they sending him reports that Lee's army is already crossing the river when they're not? And Meade's like, well, here I am a lot closer, and I haven't gotten that report. And they're like, well, we don't know. Yeah, so he does say to Halleck, as you put it, I like this, the realities his army faced. Mm-hmm. And let's see, where did I mark the quote? He said, I do not desire to imitate his example, meaning Lee's, at Gettysburg and assault a position where the chances were so greatly against success. I wish in advance to moderate the expectations of those who, in ignorance of the difficulties to be encountered, may expect too much. All that I can do under the circumstances, I pledge this army to do. Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty good way to tell your boss, F off, you know? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to do my job as best I can with what I have. Right.
And by the way, when he writes that letter, I mean, he has just gotten this missive from the president telling him about Grant's victory at Vicksburg. And he says, and now you, by the literal or substantial destruction of Lee's army, the war will be over.
No pressure.
He has to look at that and just go, oh my God. I mean, the bar now is I've got to not just defeat Lee. I've done that.
Right.
To destroy him. And, I mean, you speak of unrealistic, which of course is what General Hunt in his wonderful, that were in Battles and Leaders, his last work.
Right.
The expectations from the victory at Gettysburg, the expectations among Lincoln and his confidants were so unrealistic because of that victory that they actually believed that he could destroy Lee's army.
Just goes to show, top down doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
When he does, Meade does send that information to Halleck that we're talking about here, Halleck says the opportunity to attack his divided force should not be lost. The president is urgent and anxious that your army should move against him by forced marches, as you pointed out. Right. What is the high command in the Army of the Potomac? Are they privy to this information coming in, and is he leaning on them at this point? I know he does later, but what are they? First of all, how about this? Let's go into this. Who is the high command? Because Meade's got new commanders that he's got to deal with, untested as corps commanders.
Right.
Who
right.
are?
French, like General French.
General French,
who's commanding the Third Corps. French hasn't proven himself to do much of anything. But I think he was better than Birney at that stage because, and by the way, my wife and I were married in the Lee Chapel at Washington and Lee. It's where I went to law school.
Okay.
And the bishop who presided over our wedding was David Bell Birney IV.
Oh.
And I got to tell you, he told me after the wedding, he really felt an eerie feeling in that Lee Chapel. I'm sure. Lee demolished your great-great-grandfather's school. David was a good friend of mine.
That's pretty cool.
He was a bishop of Massachusetts, and then moved back to Kentucky because that's where his family came from. But anyway, you've got French commanding the Third Corps. You've got General Wadsworth in command of the First Corps because General Newton was ill at the time Lee actually came up against Meade came up against Lee's defenses.
Okay.
So there's some fresh people in there.
Yeah, and not to mention all the casualties he suffered. And all that other nonsense that we've been talking about there. So let's see. July 9th, Meade issues a circular to his corps commanders. What does that say? What does that cover?
This is the order circular of what date?
July 9th. So it's let's see, directed the 6th Corps to move to the National Road from Middletown to Boonesboro. It looks like he's moving everybody.
He is moving the army, the 7 different corps of his army, on routes that, as best as he can do, are parallel routes, so that they're not all stretched out on one road.
Right.
Or 2 and 3 and 4 are not stretched out on one road. And the object is to get them to Middletown as fast as he can get them.
Why?
And, well, just because he wants to try to intercept Lee before he can cross the Potomac River.
So Meade is not against fighting.
Oh, no.
No. So it's not that he was just kind of like lackadaisically following along, going, well, it's just so far out of reach, not even trying. He knows that a fight is probably something he should do, but, it's like, I know that I should lift weights, but if my arm is broken, I'm going to have a hard time doing it effectively with both my arms. Right. So like he has a lot of things to consider and a lot of juggling to do. But my point is, the reason I asked that was to illustrate that he is moving. He is in pursuit.
Oh, yes.
He's not just sitting there.
No. He's moving as fast as he can move that army.
And not yet supplied.
They're marching on nothing.
Right.
They're hungry, shoeless. Horses are ready to collapse. The army's in difficult shape, really seriously difficult shape.
So, does Halleck still push Meade at this point to act on the intelligence that he's getting in Washington regarding?
You should move by forced marches.
Yeah, move by force. So he's still saying this.
Of course, Meade. He says that's basically what we've been doing, General. I mean, that's all they've been doing is forced marches.
Right. Let's see. I think Halleck writes to him, and I think this is July. No. I think it's still the 9th. He says, the evidence that Lee will fight north of the Potomac seems reliable. In that case, you will want all your forces in hand.
Right.
And he says, as you say, with some humility, don't be influenced by any dispatch from here against your own judgment. Which, okay, now if I'm Meade and I hear that, I'm like, oh, thank God. Get off my back. Thank you. You're trusting me to do the job that you've given me. Yeah. How long does that last?
Not very long.
Okay, that's what I thought.
But it's an interesting point though on that letter from Halleck. Halleck is telling him what every great military theorist would have advised Meade, and Meade would have known he would be advised of that. And that is, if you are going to intercept the enemy, you bring everything you've got there. Mm-hmm. And it's called, to Karl von Clausewitz, it's economy of force.
Right.
You bring everything to bear on that enemy. And of course, that's the purpose. You've got to get everything there. And going through the mud, going through all this with lame horses and horses collapsing and everything else, they're trying to bring everything they've got to bear on that enemy that's supposedly between Hagerstown and Downsville.
Mm-hmm.
And Meade's intelligence about the position of Lee was all relatively accurate. He had a good idea of where this enemy was. The enemy had a good idea of him. Lee was advised that as they were beginning, they were erecting these installations along the Salisbury Ridge, that we've got about 24 hours until Meade is on us. I mean, that's the kind of respect they showed him.
Yeah.
And after all they've been going through and the distance they've been going through, far longer than Lee's army, they were concerned that they might not have enough time to put this together before Meade gets there. And so Lee was advised, listen, we got about 24 hours, and that enemy's going to be here.
Now, for people who are still new to all this, why isn't Lee just back in Virginia?
He can't get across the Potomac.
Why is that?
The rains. These rains that have all Meade's army and Lee's army. Torrential rains.
So the river's up.
The Potomac River, when Lee's army forded it to get to Maryland on the 15th and 16th of June, it was up to their knees, the soldiers' knees. It's now 13 to 16 feet deep.
Jeez.
That's how hard the rain was coming down.
Right.
And there were no bridges, because the one bridge Lee had left there on the south bank of the Potomac, dismantled the bridge. And they put it on the south bank of the Potomac, was attacked by a small band of cavalry, mostly the 5th New York cavalry. They swam across the river, got on the southern bank, attacked it, and it was only a small company of engineers guarding that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Seized the bridge, destroyed most of the pontoons, burned those they couldn't, and got out. And what Lee did, and I got it. This is almost phenomenal to think about. When Lee arrives in Hagerstown and gets out on Salisbury Ridge and starts setting up those defenses, he calls his engineers and he tells them, we have to have a bridge across the Potomac at Falling Waters.
Yeah.
We'll deal with what we can cross at Williamsport when the time comes. We need a bridge because we got 57 miles of wagon trains with all their goods. and that they have seized during the campaign, and plus their ambulances. And those engineers and their teams put together an 800-foot span of bridges with 24 pontoons in 68 hours.
Jeez.
And they were crossing all of those wagon trains, all of the First Corps, all of the of AP Hill's Corps. Only Dick Ewell's Corps would wade the river on the 14th of July at Williamsport, and it would be up to their chests.
But that's enough. That's low enough.
But that's right. We got them all across.
Right. Wow.
But it is a phenomenal piece of work. I don't think I've ever read anything that was more, remarkable than that operation there.
Yeah. Now, so by the end of, I think it's July 10th, Meade is poised for a fight.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so this is great because this is what Halleck and everybody wants. But what's Halleck's advice for Meade at that point?
He doesn't stop. You got to wait for your reinforcements.
Yes. Now he says, I think it will be best for you to postpone a general battle until you can concentrate all your forces and get up your reserves and reinforcements. Man.
Wouldn't you like to have heard what it was really like in Meade's tent
Yes.
after he got one of these missives from
I would have loved to have heard the streak of cursing that he would have been letting fly then. I mean, really. And now you kind of understand why Hooker quit, you know?
Oh boy. Boy, yeah.
You just can't win. You can't do anything right.
No.
But now, so then does Meade take his advice? Does he not fight?
He holds back. I mean, Meade still has to, what he does, he has to feel for where it is even possible for him to be successful in an attack.
Right.
He can't just throw people at that.
Right.
So what he wants to do is send elements, divisions of each one of his corps, or as many of his corps as he can, to move ahead and probe to see where the return fire is coming from.
Okay.
And to see if there is a possibility of an attack that would be successful against that. And so he spends his time doing that. And Meade actually talks about to his corps commanders, let's just attack in the morning. Because he's so up with his Halleck and Lincoln telling him they need to destroy this enemy, that he just almost surrenders to it and says, well, let's just attack this morning.
Right.
and obviously, as I say in the book, he talking like that to his corps commanders was not very welcome, because most of them were telling him, listen, General, I don't think we ought to do anything of the sort. So that's what prompts him to call a conference.
Right. So at this conference, what does he ask, and what's the answer?
Well, he tells them, I'm inclined, if I get the support of all of you, to make an attack. Or at least probe the enemy to see where we can make an attack. All of them tell him, except two, and that's Wadsworth and Howard. Neither one of those corps, by the way, would be ones Meade would choose to launch this attack. I can tell you right now, they're both cut up. They're both demolished.
Right.
Really. The First Corps is going to cease to exist here before long. So Meade doesn't really care about them. All the other corps commanders, though, are adamant that we should never do that. We should never attack them. Meade then opts for the next morning probing. And of course, it's that probing that uncovers the fact that Lee escapes in the night.
And right, so he says I'm guessing it's after the council.
Yeah.
That he tells Halleck that it was his intention to attack the enemy or desire. But let's see. He says, in view of the important and tremendous issues involved in the result, knowing that if I were defeated, the whole question would be reversed, the road to Washington and to the north open, and all the fruits of my victory at Gettysburg dissipated. I think that's a pretty good reason to not, because, I mean, as he said already, I'll just be doing what Lee did and we defeated him doing.
Right. Imagine.
But there's more at stake here because he's, like he says, he's opening the road to Washington and the north.
Potentially, right. But it's even more important than and more immediately important than that. Think about what has happened to the Army of the Potomac for the 26 months before Meade became commander. Mm-hmm. Lost every battle they ever fought, and they suffer horrific casualties. So much so that no one wanted to volunteer for service anymore. Mm. And so what do? They institute the draft. Well, the drafts are never popular.
No.
In fact, while we're talking here about Meade and Lee at Falling Waters, there are riots in New York City.
Right.
And here you have a Lincoln administration that had Meade made that attack and been defeated, a bloody defeat, which it would have been. Every commander who looked at those works said this would have been impossible to overcome. Had it been a bloody repulse, what then?
Right.
What then?
Yeah.
And it could be that Lincoln would have been forced to, basically give up on this war.
Yeah.
He saved his bacon, in this. I think he did,
sure.
Clearly. Because and then Halleck says, of course, we don't know where you are or where the enemy is, but we think you should do X. Meade knows. Meade knows daggone well. He's a great soldier. And I often ruminate over the fact that, had he made that attack and been at a nasty, bloody repulse, more casualties, in a losing effort, that he took a victory and turned it into a disaster, irrespective of whether Lee wanted to move east, just Lee goes across, Lee move east. He just gets across the Potomac. Still, it's a disaster.
Sure.
Gettysburg, the campaign, is a disaster.
Yeah. You've got this great victory, and now it's gone.
Now you just throw it away.
Yeah. It seems like the right decision to not attack.
Of course it is.
And so they don't attack. And what is it, the 13th to the 14th over that night, the Confederates slip away?
They slip away.
And Meade and others go into the works that they left behind, the fortifications. Yeah. And what's their, Meade was an engineer, right?
Engineer.
What was his impression of what the Confederates built?
Were impregnable. That he made comments that had I attacked, I would have done the same thing Lee did at Gettysburg and lost. And however, with this loss, potentially the way was open to Washington and Baltimore. It would have been a unmitigated disaster. Other officers who looked at it, from lieutenant colonels to lieutenants, saw that this was utterly the most elaborate defense works they ever saw. And frankly, some of these memoirs of these officers would say these are the most elaborate works ever in the Army up until Petersburg. And of course, that was a campaign fought against trenches and works that were absolutely unbelievable for its time. Yeah. And yet they compare this to it.
Charles Wainwright, he said, these were by far the strongest I have seen yet, evidently laid out by engineers and built as if they meant to stand a month's siege. The parapet was a good 6 feet wide on top, and the guns, which were very thick, were all placed so as to get a perfect crossfire and sweep their whole front. So that's Wainwright. And then Meade himself says that when he examined the positions, it brought me clearly to the opinion that an attack under the circumstances which I had to propose to make would have resulted disastrously to our arms. And when asked why he had that opinion, he said, "It is founded upon the strength of the enemy's position. I will say that if I had attacked the enemy in the position which they had occupied, he having the advantage of position and being on the defensive, his artillery in position and his infantry behind parapets and rifle pits, the very same reasons and causes which produced my success at Gettysburg would have operated in his favor there and be likely to produce success on his part."
There it is. There it is.
And who can argue with that? The guy actually was there on the ground.
On the ground. Right. Right.
Where do you think, or why do you, why do you think that the criticisms of Meade stem from, and why? Was he not a very well-liked man? Was it political initially? Because it all stems from back then.
It's a great question, really.
Really? Because I really stumbled through that one.
It's a great question. Where does all this stem from? I mean, fundamentally, it stems from Lincoln. It's Lincoln.
Right.
Now, he has a lot of his associates there in the White House. We all know their names, who chimed in, written diaries and so forth, where we quote. But it's Lincoln. And the problem Meade faced is being criticized by Lincoln is the stature of Lincoln and what he was, and frankly what he became over time.
Yeah,
the martyred president.
Right.
And now I come from Kentucky. I'm sitting in Kentucky right now, and I even did the title work on Lincoln's boyhood home at Knob Creek for the National Park Service. I have a huge admiration for Lincoln.
Right.
However, in this circumstance, Lincoln was way off the base. Mm-hmm. And the comments he made really, and I think even Halleck finally understood this, these have the tendency to not just damage Meade, but damage the cause. You criticize your general officer who's won the largest land battle ever fought in the North American continent, and you're defeating the cause. Mm-hmm. You're getting people upset with the cause. And of course, Lincoln never lived long enough to really see the ramifications of that, but we know Meade did. And we also know that as a result of all this, Meade became kind of an isolated figure, sadly. I wasn't too long ago, after the book came out, a fellow in Canada asked me if I would like to see a letter that he had. He was a collector of ephemera. And I said, what's the letter? He says, written by George Meade to John Batchelder. Oh. And I said, yeah, I'd like to see that. And without having it in front of me here, Meade says in this rather lengthy letter that the problem that people have is that no one has left any record of where I was during the fighting at Gettysburg. And it almost appears that I wasn't even there, because my subordinates don't mention me at all. And he said, there's no way I can fight this, and I'm not going to. But I do want you to know that it is because of the silence of so many of those subordinates of mine that I'm just not remembered. He even Margaret in November of 1863 that sooner or later people will come to the conclusion I was never even at the Battle of Gettysburg.
And that kind of was true. I mean, you meet people that come here for the first time and they think Grant was here. I'm serious. They really and in all earnestness, they'll say, when you ask them who are the commanders, well, Lee and Grant, and they've never heard of George Meade.
Yeah, but sooner or later it'll come to pass that people will feel I was never even here. And you really bleed for him.
Yeah.
This is a guy who gave it all. I mean, he gave everything that was in him to that victory and to try to follow it up. And it's because of the criticism at the end that just stuck. And of course, all these subordinates he's talking about are ones that are walking to the beat of Lincoln. I mean, that's where their bread's buttered.
Yeah.
And you've seen this in associations and groups where, they cater to the one who's the boss.
Right.
No matter what the deal is, no matter how you've been treated.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's at play here. It's a very, very sad deal. And I kind of grew toward the end of writing this book that my heart bled for him. For me, I just really felt this poor man had just been pulled through the mill.
I agree. And you know what I think, and this is just how my stupid brain works, but I look at him and I go, man, now if he were a good-looking guy, it might not be so hard on him, but he's got nothing going for him. So,
no, he really doesn't.
He's lucky he's got his wife.
Hancock,
No.
Oh boy, with his white collars and cuffs. And all this. Oh no.
He's got nothing.
I quote one soldier and one officer in this saying, it's really kind of hard to make Meade look well dressed.
Poor guy. So that's why
God love him.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing is like he's a steady guy. He's a steady commander. He's not some, wackadoodle like Custer. Although I love Custer. But he's just, he's steady, and you need steady people.
Steady, hard driving.
Well, yeah, there's that one guy that he calls a straggler, and the kid had bad diarrhea. And he yelled at him and told him to get back in line. And the kids got diarrhea. He just left the column to go out in the field, and Meade comes across him, and Meade says, don't you know this is punishable by death? What are you straggling for? And he goes, I got really bad diarrhea. He goes, I don't want to hear it. Get in line.
Yeah, he tried to describe it. Meade says, I don't want to hear anymore.
Poor kid. At least he didn't shoot him. But he said, if I see you again, I'm going to have you arrested.
Yeah, this is during the pursuit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was earlier on, though. But no, so Lincoln, he writes that famous letter that he puts in a drawer and never sends. But it's found years after.
Yeah.
And that probably aids in ruining his reputation.
Of course it has.
There's a line here, or a couple lines from it. He says, "Again, my dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within your easy grasp."
Oh, God.
Just like a politician behind a desk 100 miles away, right? And you have and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our other late successes, have ended the war. You referred to this earlier. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. So it's Meade's fault that the war will now continue.
Correct.
Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it.
Yeah.
Wow. A little dramatic there, Abe.
See, there's the problem. That's the problem. There's where it comes from. This Halleck it comes from Lincoln.
It comes from Lincoln. Probably the committee for the conduct, or on the conduct of the war, and the testimonies from some of his subordinates there.
Yes, and it's interesting. Many of those subordinates in the spring of 1864, when they were testifying, many of them supported him. In those testimonies. But it's not as though they carried that out in everyday life with me. It was there under oath. They said, most of them said what they believed. Some of them said things that later they retracted in other writings, like Henry Hunt. But by and large, it seems that Meade was kind of without an ally.
Yeah.
Without someone or some group to support him.
Yeah.
And they left him for other people, other things that were more agreeable to the administration.
Well, it might be 158 years too late, but I think that group is starting to form now. And your book is a good way to a good thing for them to rally around and use as evidence to throw in Meade's critics' face.
I love reading your things you read on social media. The book, there seems now to be a Meade renaissance.
Yeah,
and that just warms my heart. Really, yeah. You could just take the official records and diaries, whatever, but mostly the official records. And construct, not reconstruct, but construct for people what those records say and show them what Meade was.
Right.
It really just warms the heart.
I agree. I think, I feel bad that, he really wasn't a bad general. And yet he, for those who even know his name, he's got this reputation of letting Lee slip away.
Absolutely.
And it's sad.
It is.
I want. Do you guys have any questions, Eric? And 6 questions. You got any 6 questions? You sure you don't have any?
Actually, I.
All right. Well, think them up here. I want to read this here before we get to the questions here. Okay, so it's the last paragraph of chapter 19, but I think it's a pretty good cherry to put on top here. Sadly, the blow to Meade's reputation leveled by President Lincoln, General Halleck, and others is how history has remembered him, even after out-generaling Robert E. Lee to claim a decisive victory in the largest land engagement ever fought on North American continent, and the first victory of the Army of the Potomac since the war began. One wonders, though, what Meade's detractors, including Lincoln, Wells, Stanton, and Dana, would have said had Meade attacked Lee's defense lines on July 13th and suffered a bloody and crippling repulse, which likely would have occurred. We will never know. But we could probably guess.
Yeah, we can.
I don't think it would have been too good for him had that happened. All right, Ken, one of our loyal listeners is here. He likes to sit in with us every once in a while. His nickname is 6 Questions Lentz. His real name is Michael Lentz, but he often asks a lot of questions, and they're good questions. So I'm going to turn on the mic and let him ask you a couple questions, if you don't mind. All right, here we go.
All right, Mike.
All right. Thank you so much. I took this book out onto the battlefield and actually read it at the Lydia Leicester House, as well as some of the areas described in the book. And so it was really fun to do that. So thank you for the book.
You're mighty welcome.
My question is this. When Meade is in pursuit, is he still under the same conditions when he's appointed to command? Is he still the covering force for Washington and Baltimore?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Halleck, even on July 5th, writes to Meade saying that you've got to remember you're the covering force of Baltimore and Washington. And by the way, that is the one reason, not one, but it's the principal reason. Meade pauses before he begins the movement to pursue Lee, is that he has to make sure that Lee is actually crossing the South Mountain Range in order to get back to Virginia. He's got to have some proof of it, because otherwise, if Meade had suddenly moved south, thinking that he was going to go along a parallel route with Lee, and Lee actually then began to move back east, he would be threatening Baltimore and Washington, and that would be a violation of Meade's orders. Meade had to make absolute, positive sure that Lee was actually going across the mountains to Hagerstown. And when he got that information, he moved the army. And it's because of orders like that. Of course, he has to protect Baltimore and Washington, but he cannot move until he knows exactly where Lee is going. When he gets that information, he moves, and he moves as fast as he can move that army.
That makes it, again, it's just one more thing that makes that job impossible.
Yeah.
And he did. So within all these parameters, How could you say he didn't do a good job? You got another one there, 6 questions?
Yes, I do, and this actually concerns Lee's army. I think oftentimes when we hear or read about this incident, we always think that Lee's army is crippled, it's hugging the river. We fail to realize that in 1862, he also fought a desperate battle with the Potomac River to his back.
Yes.
But also, how dangerous is the Army of Northern Virginia at this point? Are they capable of assuming an offensive posture?
Boy, are they. Are they? I mean, really. Clausewitz used to write about a defeated army. And he said, you always have to treat that army as you would a wounded lion. You can wound the lion, but don't you dare try to fiddle with him. He'll eat you alive. And I wrote the book Retreat from Gettysburg. People regard my Meade book as kind of its companion in a way. And by the way, that's where I got a healthy respect for Meade, is writing of Lee's operations and watching Meade counter them. But I can tell you, Lee's army, in spite of its losses, and it had horrific losses, and the losses were in field grade officers and line officers, just like Meade's. Both these armies had suffered tremendous casualties, 51,000 combined casualties. Yet, Lee's army was as ready to fight as any army ever. And the proof of that is how quickly they established that Salisbury Ridge, Downsville line. And that is probably as elaborate a defense work that these soldiers would see up to Petersburg. Some of them said that in their memoirs, up to Petersburg. And I mean, they were ready for them. And in the meantime, their engineers construct an 800-foot bridge across the Potomac River in 68. That's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
You think this army has the capacity to defeat you? Well, I'll tell you one thing I got to hand it to Meade. Meade knows an enemy, and he knows his enemy. And Meade is not going to fritter with his enemy. Either he can take him or he can't. And when he judges he can't in that circumstance, that's it. We'll beat him another day.
And so for my final question is, are you familiar with the quote that Lee is reportedly have said when he heard that Meade took command? It piggybacks off what you just said.
That he'll make no error in my front. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that before. Yes, that Lee supposedly said that. But I think that's a good assessment of George Meade. George Meade, he will not make a mistake in front of you. He will not. Now, you can defeat him, yeah, possibly, but he's not going to make a mistake. He's not going to let himself be the one that causes his defeat. You're going to have.
And that's all I have. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Very good. You're only operating at half strength there today. Just 3 questions, huh?
Three.
Much like the Army of the Potomac, right there.
You took some casualties over the weekend. Well, thanks, Mike. Good job as always. Ken, thank you very much for doing this. It was great talking to you. And would you come back on so we could talk about your other books?
I would love to. You just tell me when.
Oh, that's perfect. I'll go out and get all the ones that I can get, and we'll start reading, and we'll have you on.
That photograph behind you has to be Jack Kennedy and Jacob Sheed.
That is absolutely correct, yeah.
I knew Jacob Sheeds really well.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah, he was a sweet man.
Yeah.
He gave everybody a tour. Ike, Jack Kennedy, you name it. He gave them all.
He was like the celebrity guide.
He was. He was the celebrity guide.
My friend Matt is his grandson, and he gave us that.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, he comes from an old family of Gettysburg now.
Oh, yeah. That name is all over the place here.
It's German.
Yeah. Of course it is. What else would it be? Ken, thank you very much for coming on. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Oh, my cameras aren't working now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening and for your support. And we'll talk to you next time.
Very good. Bye, Matt.
All right, Ken. Thank you very much. Have a good one. We'll talk. I'll get in touch with you about doing other books.
That's good.
All right, great. Thank you.